Welcome back to the channel, and today I wanted to give you all another alternative history realignment guide for you all to follow in your dynasties. In this one, we are going to create a realignment structure on the Pac-12, becoming the Pac-16 back in the 2010s. This was almost a reality but fell apart at the last minute, so we will cover what the last decade may have looked like and proceed into the present day and into the future 30 seasons of your dynasty. So without further ado, let's get into it. But before we get too far into the video, I do want to preface that these team replacements are not a hard stop. The only recommended alignment I suggest you start with is the very first one I give you. The rest are only suggestions based on made up scenarios to create a more realistic feeling to your dynasty run. So feel free to change out a team that is similar to the one I mentioned during a realignment phase, but may have a better history in your run. Remember, whatever you choose to do, whether it's to copy mine verbatim or put your own twist on it, make sure you do what you want to do and enjoy the most. I appreciate y'all tuning in, and let's get into it. So back in the summer of 2010, the Pac-10 that we all know and love was looking to make a big move in the realignment game. With the Big 12 on eggshells as it normally was this time of year, and the Huskers and Buffaloes already making their moves out of the conference, there was another offer on the table wherein the teams Texas A&M, Texas Tech, Texas, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State would have left the conference they helped create to join the West Coast teams. This would have made the PAC the first 16-team conference since the WAC back in the 90s, so it would have been a major deal. Of course, we know now that this didn't happen, but what if it did? Well, to start, the conference would have broken into two divisions, East and West, splitting into an easier to manage regional buckets and have been off to the races. Outside of this, Utah would have never been added and been stuck in the Mountain West. This also would have decimated the Big 12, knocking them down from 10 teams in 2011 to 5 the next season. To even have a conference at this point, you needed 8 teams, and I am sure they would have made a move to acquire some before the next season. Some of the names they looked towards after the departure of Nebraska and Colorado were TCU eventually joining in 2012 after A&M and Mizzou left, as did Virginia. Assuming the SEC would not have gone after a single team, we can assume Mizzou stays, and the Big 12 would probably have added Utah since they were already looking to move to a bigger conference. This makes them eligible with their 8 teams at the time of this story. So for the rest of the 2010s, I want to keep it pretty brief, and it also keeps some conferences history the same, such as the WAC and the Big East dying out, to better align with the modern day conferences. Since this move would have launched the first 16-team P5 conference, the other power conferences would try hard to compete, so moves like Maryland and Rutgers to the Big Ten will still occur in this timeline. But with the West locked down to the SEC, they would have probably moved to the East to snap the schools from the ACC, and at the time, the two best in the last part of the 2000s and early part of the 2010s would have been FSU and Virginia Tech. Clemson would have made more sense, but I'm sure South Carolina would have tried at all costs to deny them from entering the SEC, and also the Virginia Tech had a better run in the early 2010s. Clemson had a better run in the late 2010s, but at this point, we're going to focus on the early 2010s. The ACC would have responded with the same teams they did in real life, with Syracuse and Pitt making the move, but Louisville and Cincinnati in our timeline would both make the move to the Big 12, not really noticing a sharp difference in the competition between the two. The ACC would need one more team to get to that 12 number, so they would likely add a Big East remnant from Florida, USF. The last two P5 moves would be the Big Ten reaching into the Midwest to take Iowa State and Kansas, both very serviceable to Rutgers and Maryland on the field, but having a better basketball history than most in the conference would make them good adds. To replace them, the Big 12 would reach back to the Southwest days to add Houston and SMU. The rest of the moves are displayed on screen, with a bunch of the group of 5 teams looking very similar to what we do see today with minor alterations. And that leads us into the full alignment on screen now, so pause here to copy these down. And before we get into the rest of the alignment, I would like to ask you all, if you're enjoying today's video, do drop a like and subscription below. These are 2 things that really help the channel to continue to grow and are free of charge to you. But with that out of the way, let's get into this guide. One of the very first moves for our timeline is that in the 2025 season, the Big 12 wanted to add to get back to 12 teams. To do so, they sought out top brands in the G5 ranks. This was determined to be Tulane from the American and BYU from Independence. To replace the teams that have been stolen, the American added UCF from Conference USA, and they added New Mexico State to backfill them. But 2 seasons later, the Big Ten looks to become the largest conference in the country. To suffice, they took a look in both directions and grabbed K-State from the Big 12 and Pitt from the ACC. To keep up, the SEC adds both Miami and Clemson from the ACC, truly decimating the top brands from the conference. To mend the wounds, the Big 12 adds a Texas team and UTSA, while the ACC adds UCF to get to 10 teams, the minimum for a conference championship game. To stay afloat, the American adds one of the highest viewed rivalries in Army and Navy to the conference. After all this moving in the past decade, in 2029, the G5 conference commissioners, alongside the Big 12 and the ACC commissioners, file a lawsuit against the NCAA in the top 3 conferences. They allege antitrust practices and backroom deals that kept cutting away at the conference's structures. So in a settlement at the end of the year, the conference commissioners agreed to the following. 1, any team that is set to leave a conference before their contract is up must spend 2 seasons in independence. At number 2, all conferences cannot exceed their current limit unless they are below the 14-team threshold. Number 3, all conferences must meet this 14-team threshold at the end of the 2039 season. After this ruling, there was little to no movement as all media deals lasted till at least the 2033 season, where the American Conference was the first to lapse. In a bid to find footing as a power conference, the league partnered with a growing national TV brand to offer premium contracts of 4 teams who would be the first to jump. With the SEC and the Big Ten both above the 14-team threshold, they were destined to lose teams when they re-signed their next contract. To get out ahead of this, we see these teams make the jump to independence: Pitt, Rutgers, Maryland, Northwestern, Vandy, and Kentucky. These teams spend the next 2 seasons here in independence, and in the 2035 season, Kentucky, Vandy, Pitt, and Maryland join the American Conference. Rutgers and Northwestern were invited to and joined the Big 12 at this time. With the Pac-12 the only conference left above the 14-team limit, they decide not to re-sign Cal and Colorado in the 2039 season. Since this is the end of the contract, they are not forced to sit out 2 seasons, but with no power conferences open to adding them, they join the Mountain West in hopes of making a bid for a power conference in the future. And after only 2 seasons, the landscape is thrown for a loop as Notre Dame wants to join a conference for the first time in its football history. With major offers on the table, the Irish finally found a home in the ACC. With the major brand under their name, the ACC went on the offensive and gathered Pitt, Maryland, and Kentucky from the American. This would have to wait as the media deal for the American was not up for another 5 seasons, so all 3 teams sat in independence for 2 years, and UConn was added to get the American back to the 12 teams. And with the 2-year probation period ending, the 3 teams in independence join the ACC. At the same time, we see a flip-flop of teams in the G5 as the Sun Belt and Conference USA contracts in this same offseason, allowing for the teams to realign freely. With the bid to cut costs, multiple universities switch allegiances. We see App State, ODU, Coastal Carolina, Middle Tennessee State, Georgia State, JMU, Kennesaw State, and Georgia Southern move to Conference USA. And while that happens, Southern Miss, UTEP, Jack State, New Mexico State, Sam Houston State, and Louisiana Tech move to the Sun Belt. And another 3 years later, we see yet another ruling in the Supreme Court, and after years of litigation from the SEC and the Big Ten, we finally see an increase to the 14-team limit to 16 teams. Along with this, the Supreme Court waives the forced independence as long as the university can provide a buyout at the time of departure. This causes all 5 major conferences to scramble to grab the next best teams available, with many media companies footing the bill for major universities buyouts. It is an all-out frenzy for the top teams. First, we see the Pac-12 staying regional and grabbing up Boise State in a surprise move, as well as Colorado. The SEC reinvites the Wildcats back to the SEC, as well as Texas from the Pac-12. In another surprising move, Texas does in fact leave the Pac-12, and they are replaced by Cal at this time. The Big 12 adds both Vandy and Memphis from the American, and as it looks, the Big 10 will be on the outside looking in for the very first time in its history. They add Louisville and Cincinnati in a surprise move, forcing the Big 12 to add App State and UConn at the last second. And finally, Texas State moves to the American. And that will end it here, guys, for this one. With only 6 seasons left, I felt as though it would be a good place to stop and experience this rendition of alignments. This one was definitely interesting, as most times with these alternate history guides, I try to just let the story build itself and just throw things against the wall until it sticks. I am sure a bunch of you are also looking at this and seeing a lot of sacrilegious things. I was the same way the second I moved UK to the ACC, but I will say this was by far the most diverse walkthrough we've done yet. So I hope you all enjoyed it. Be sure to let me know what your thoughts are. What do you all find the most interesting or the worst move? I would love to hear y'all's thoughts down in the comments below. But with that, that is all I have today, and I appreciate you all tuning in, and I'll catch you all in the next one. And a huge shout out to Chris, our very first premium channel member. Thanks for all your support, man. It's really appreciated.